Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of the James Tea Podcast, where we spill James and spin the tea, and we're going to be covering two new releases today. We're going to be talking, well, new-ish, because, they came out in December, but whatever. We're going to be talking about the new albums from Little Simz, artist we've covered on this show before. Her last album, Sometimes I Might Be Introvert, was one of our favorite albums of 2021. And we're going to be talking about the sophomore album from SZA. We're talking about S.O.S.
Yes, indeed. Call us Taylor Swift, because we're going back to December for this one. We're catching up on some massive records that came out just after we stopped reviewing music at the end of the year. The kind of records that are from artists that are big enough for us to kind of not be able to justify not acknowledging in some format. And particularly in the note of SZA as well, who this is her first album since, I think, was Control 2017. It feels very 2017 in my memory.
2017 or 18.
I think it was 17. Yeah, that was just because that's just such a 2017 record for me. When I think of that year, that's just one of the albums I think of.
Oh yeah.
So it's just been so long waiting for new material from SZA, and she finally, she gave it to us. She gave us like 23 tracks of it in mid-December, announced with a little bit of anticipation, like announced a little bit before the fact, but then it was just kind of just here, and we had to take it as it was and consume it. It was a very, very fast release. And so I think let's start off by talking about that. Let's talk about SZA's new record, especially given that I'm making an assumption here that we're all more or less fans of Control. I think it was definitely one of the albums.
I love Control.
I haven't heard it.
It is certainly one of the most sort of biggest albums of 2017 in terms of just general kind of commercial memorability, what we think of when we associate with that year. But there were so many great songs on that record. It was such an assured, confident debut for SZA. It was really putting her best foot forward as well, kind of stepping out from the shadow of sort of Top Dog and the sort of the people that she's been associated with to kind of really kind of carve out her own niche, essentially. And so that was a great record that still stands up, still holds up to this day as well. I still semi-regularly go back to songs like Drew Barrymore, and I listen
Drew Barrymore is one of my favorite songs of the decade, honestly.
Yeah, it's just fucking amazing song. And I listened to the album as well, revisited the album itself as well to prep myself for the new record too. So we're here with S.O.S. as well. SZA is sticking to the abbreviations with her album titles. I'm a little disappointed she didn't call it Alt. But
so we could get Control Alt Delete,
or even just like literally any other key that is something. But
Shift.
She should have called it Z so she could Control Z this regrettable album. But that's also on one level too corny, but also too mean, because I don't hate this record. I just have some complicated feelings about it. Jake, I think as the person probably here is maybe the most into SZA, I want to hear from you first as well. What were your thoughts and expectations? What did you want going into a new SZA record? And what's it been like for you kind of just taking this in and trying to wrap your head around it?
As Riley said, Control, that was a big album when it came out. SZA was like, she had really kind of built herself up as being on Top Dog through like EP releases and just like features and stuff. Like people were really awaiting that album. There was like, people were hungry for it. And it was one of those rare albums where it really felt like it kind of met the hype that it delivered on. And it was just a really great synthesis of contemporary R&B, some neo soul, some hip hop. Just like SZA's this really multi-talented artist who also is just like a great songwriter. She manages to take lots of feelings of isolation, lots of introspection, and lots of stuff that like feels very much like it's like on the periphery for some other artists, and SZA kind of makes the whole like introversion shtick kind of her whole identity. And what I wanted from a follow-up to that is that just an elaboration on Control, and just sort of like maybe something that's a little bit more expansive, maybe something that goes for a little bit more ambitious, maybe some more collaborations with other artists. She worked with people like Travis Scott and Kendrick Lamar on her first album. So I was expecting something that like more or less when you look at S.O.S. from like a purely surface level standpoint, you see who's on the track list, you see the amount of songs that are there, the length of the album, you're just like, okay, This is an artist who really looks like they're trying to kind of deftly avoid the sophomore slump. And then she just falls into it. Honest to God, this if we had counted this on the more proper album releases of last year, this is honestly on the more disappointing end for me, because there's just not a lot here that animates me, and that's for a couple of reasons. The sharp production and songwriting that was on that first album that felt so focused, that felt so poignant, is occasionally here sometimes, but across this album's incredibly bloated 67-minute long runtime, 23 tracks long, it's really spotty. I think one of my biggest issues here is honestly, like, first and foremost, the production. I don't know what happened. I don't know if this is just me, but honestly, I kind of hate how this album sounds. Not to the point where I think like any of the songs are actively, well, there's one or two that I think are actively made bad by it. But for the most part, it just kind of puts it in the very middling range. But especially on the first third, this album is nothing but low end. The whole thing just swallows the mix. The bass, like everything sounds like it's behind a wall. Everything sounds muffled. Everything sounds like it's got this sort of grayness on top of it. And it's just like the bass is just, it's so fucking loud. And not to mention the whole mix itself is just like weirdly quiet. It gets better in the final 2/3 of the record, but that was something that really pervaded songs like S.O.S, songs like Kill Bill, songs like Seek and Destroy, songs like Low. All of these songs are actively made worse by the fact that the production just kind of smothers them out and just kind of actively erases any kind of edge or poignancy that they have. And not to mention, doesn't take advantage of the fact that SZA's voice is incredible. Why are you making it sound like this? I don't really particularly understand this creative choice, especially when she's delivering really good vocal performances throughout the vast majority of the record. And it does get a little bit better after that, like marginally. There are moments on here that I do like. Blind, for example, I think picks up a little bit. Used, featuring Don Toliver, his features not amazing, but it animates me a little bit more than the rest of the production on the record. Snooze, I think, is one of the best songs on here. This kind of moody R&B song, this feels like what this album is going for at its most successful, frankly. And there are songs like Gone Girl, and, you know, the Phoebe Bridgers featuring on Ghost in the Machine is also very good. And then the second half of this album is a total snooze. There are moments where it tries, but when these moments happen, it tends to be on the more unsuccessful side. I'm talking about songs like F2F, where I really appreciate what this song is going for. I just wish the guitars didn't sound like butt. Just why do they sound this way? Like, all of the problems of the production on the first part of the album are present here, and like SZA's infusing this kind of rockier edge into what she's doing, and I think she can do it. It's just that it sounds terrible. And I'm just like, I'm watering at the mouth of just like, these are experiments that could theoretically work. I also feel very similarly about songs like I Hate You, for example, which just, they feel so limp. They feel so lifeless. And I think that that's what overall S.O.S is trying to do, is that like this whole album kind of feels like thematically SZA is in a state of disrepair. She's in a state of transition where she is being like, she's trying to get over a breakup. She's trying to move forward. And what's supposed to be captivating on this album is that each song is supposed to display a kind of push and pull, a kind of like, oh, she's sad because of the breakup, or now she's getting her confidence back. And it's supposed to be this like back and forth thing. But the thing is the production is so lifeless and it's so limp that it never manages to make you feel that push and pull. All of it manages to feel like, and not to mention, it also kind of comes across as contradictory occasionally. Like all of these attitudes that are being displayed, it doesn't feel as lyrically pointed as her first album, where I feel like it displays a lot of her vulnerability in a really compelling way. Whereas here, it just feels mixed up and kind of messy, and it just doesn't really work for me, especially when it's caught adrift amidst this incredibly long album. It needed to be more focused. A lot of the songs here just don't feel like, I mean, like the run of Too Late through I Hate You is just like, I don't care for like any of these songs. And granted, I do think that it ends on one of its better spots. Forgiveless is fine, but Good Days, I think, is the one of the high points on the album for me. It's one of the more animated songs on here.
We can debate, I guess, our favorites, but to me, that's the song of this record. To me, that is the strongest point. It is the most fully fleshed out, musically, lyrically, everything about that song, I think, is everything I loved about SZA on her first record. There are other moments.
Lyrically, I think that this is the strongest thing on the record. And to me, it really gets to the heart of like the idea of SZA kind of mourning the lost time of having spent so much time and so much energy and so much of her life on someone who kind of like someone or something or a relationship that just had no care for her, or that overall was just kind of a waste, and trying to regain that lost time and trying to be in love with the moment and move on from that. Like I can see through the cracks of what this album could have been on songs like Good Days. But for the most part, it's just drowned in a kind of malaise that feels like it's really antithetical to what the album wants to be.
I'm in a fairly similar boat overall. I don't think that the production bothers me to the extent that it bothers you, or at least it's not like the core, I guess, theme of my issues with the record. I started to understand this record a little bit more when I really started kind of focusing on what was connecting these songs. SZA's kind of spiraling on this record, mentally, internally. It's really like, you know, there are albums where it's about, I've had a really shit year. And then there are albums where it's like, I've had 5 really shit years in a row. And they've kind of just started to blend together to the point where I begin to feel like, I begin to forget what it feels like to have a not shit year, and also begin to forget that they're even possible, or that I might even deserve them. SZA's really in this mind state of like, it's not just a breakup record, it's a record about, you know, a string of relationships that have left her questioning what she needs out of a relationship, questioning what she's getting, questioning what she values in general, questioning, you know, her ability to trust people, questioning her sense to which she can relate to anyone else in her life, or the sense to which she feels as though anyone understands her in any real tangible sense. You know, it's a record that's really quite persistently dour. I mean, there are moments where SZA, you know, I think attempts to kind of kick herself out of this funk, but very few of them. And it's this record that is really kind of just perpetually in this state of total malaise. And I think that there's like a compelling thread there in terms of like capturing that feeling and the idea that I think I've communicated, that I like, in terms of, or at least I find to have a thread of poignancy to it, like, and a thread of like a relatability. But this thing was like, SZA is so kind of dour and in this sort of state so consistently and so cyclically, to a point where it starts to, after a while, actively work against the album, which is interesting because like, I say that I actually think the album gets a little bit better as it goes on. I kind of like, and I don't think it's a big distinction. I kind of like the second half of the album a little bit more than the first half. It's not a huge thing. More of my favorite songs are in the second half, I suppose. But just the more that I think about the album, the more that I reflect on the album, the more kind of exhausting it is. I do think there are bright spots. I think that Gone Girl, along with the aforementioned Good Days, is one of the songs that feels most emblematic of the record, of SZA's strengths, of the kind of things that she's talking about on this record as well. The dramatic sense to which her isolation, her sense of abandonment, her sense of complete, you know, inability to maintain a healthy connection to someone, and that, you know, obviously that chorus and that link of "You Better Learn How to Face It," which is beautifully sampled / interpolated from a great Hall & Oates song as well. That hook is taken from, and it's a great track. I think it's one of the best and most potent moments on the record for kind of distilling what the whole album's about. Ghost in the Machine as well, I think, is another one of those. And it's not even because Phoebe Bridgers is on it and we like Phoebe Bridgers.
No, yeah.
But it's just a very good song in and of itself already.
Yeah, even without her, it would be a good song.
I kind of like F2F. I agree it could be better.
See, I want to like it. It's just that it just sounds bad.
It could be better for sure. It could sound better, and its like aesthetic idea could have been executed better. It's welcome though for me on the record when it comes. I kind of wish that SZA would kind of lean into this sort of like Avril Lavigne-esque thing a little more and with a little bit more.
It could work.
And I do think that songs like Nobody Gets Me and Special, which I love the beat and the instrumental on that track.
Yeah, that's a
Too
good song.
Late is great too. I like I Hate You, and I think again, Good Days is a strong kind of final point to the record. Although I was then the first time I listened to this, when I got to the final track, Forgiveless, I was like instantly, my eyes shot up because I instantly recognized the sample from Björk's Hidden Place.
Old Dirty Bastard.
And Old Dirty Bastard as well. Like the combination of an ODB sample and a Björk sample like completely woke me up. And then it was like the song did nothing with either of those elements and kind of just sort of limply sort of ended, which is a shame. But yeah, so it's a frustrating record. I thought after my second listen, or during my second listen, I thought I was going to maybe even downgrade it further, but I ultimately ended up sort of sticking with where I was at. It's this weird thing. It was like this kind of record where the first time I was like, I'm not really into this, but I think I might start to appreciate it a little bit more once I get a handle on why SZA's made it the way that she has. But that kind of never really happened, even after a second listen. And I was kind of just left in this position where it's like, yeah, there's a core set of songs here that I think quite effectively communicate SZA's malaise, but they're also sort of surrounded by and kind of attached to these tracks that feel as though they're there to make the album a little bit more accessible to how people consume records nowadays, to playlisting, to TikTok, to things like that. I don't want to rail against that.
It feels
thing,
a lot like the Megan Thee Stallion album that we reviewed, kind of, where it's like a lot of it, like, I know that this isn't necessarily always the case, but a lot of it feels like label mandated stuff. A lot of it just feels like it's there, not for the sake of the album as a format, but for the sake of streaming as a venue for the album as a format.
Well, yeah, and I was thinking about it as well, and like, the thing that cemented my kind of disappointment for it, and that because I wanted to give it the benefit of the doubt, but the thing that cemented it was like someone made a comparison and then I went and kind of revisited it and it made so much sense to me. It's like, this could be done so much better, and it's sort of like, and if you want an example of that, look at the last Jhené Aiko album, Chilombo from 2020.
I thought
right?
I was going to fucking, yes,
like
I was
that
going to
album
think
is
of,
about
I
same,
thought about this as well.
That album's about the same length as this as well. That album is about as kind of discursive and overflowing and kind of messy, and also doing the
subject material.
Yeah, also doing that kind of same thing of like trying to capture different things that will bring in certain audiences as well and make this big messy thing that will also kind of be playlist friendly and all that sort of thing. I think Jhené Aiko did that fairly well with Chilombo.
I agree.
And it's sort of like, this is a sort of an attempt to do something similar structurally that kind of just doesn't get there. And it is a real shame because this is obviously a really talented artist who has a clear vision for her work, but is kind of getting in her own way a little bit with this album, I think, unfortunately.
Yeah, I gotta say, I don't hate this album, but it is maybe my least favorite kind of album. This really bloated, like 23 track album where it earns maybe, well, not even earns, like maybe 6 of those songs are even finished. And the rest of it is such fodder for not even playlists, because the rest of it isn't going to make it on any playlist. It's just bleh. And it's just, I don't know. It
feels as though SZA has a few beats that she wants to hit emotionally throughout the record, and she hits those, And then the rest of it is her trying to sustain a vibe in between those moments, essentially. And it just creates something that for listeners like us who are looking for purpose in, you know, just about everything, that's sort of missing the mark a little bit, you know?
I mean, to put it as plainly as possible, it's just so boring. And it's
Yeah.
like, my God, nobody sounds like they want to be here half the time. And it's just, which is annoying because clearly SZA is talented. I haven't heard Control or anything off of it, I don't think, which is, I mean, probably unlikely, frankly. But, you know, C minus, apply yourself.
It's an album that honestly solves all of the issues. It's like, it feels like a reversal. It feels like this should be the debut and that should be the refinement of all of what makes that work. For somebody who was such a big fan and was like actively searching through this album for purpose, for clarity, for moments that I enjoyed, I could avoid the inevitable boredom that comes with a mid-ass string of songs and a long-ass album like this on the first listen, but listening to this more than once decimates my opinion of it. Like, I could have been veering a little bit more towards skewed positively at first, but after that initial listen, it's just like, wow, this is a slog.
Yeah. Yeah, it is unfortunate. It's kind of hard to get around that, I think. But if anyone at home has any kind of take on this that you feel like might help us to maybe see it in a different light, or if you have an understanding or at least an interpretation of why this album is the way that it is that you think would help us to maybe view it in a more pleasant light, by all means, let us know. I would love to find a skeleton key to see the full appeal of what SZA's doing holistically here. But for me, it's like, you know, there's a few really strong moments here, and I like the emotional beats that she hits, but it really feels as though she dulls the impact of those beats by stringing them out and kind of providing so much pillowing filler basically in between those moments, which is a shame.
The pillows are like cheap Walmart pillows. Like, they're not really gonna last that long.
It is an album that does stumble into dullness on more than a couple of occasions.
And it really shouldn't, considering one of the most consistent collaborators on here is Sean Everett.
I mean, he's just he's just mixing and mastering it. He has no like real.
Well, it should have been mixed and mastered better.
I actually don't see. This is probably the only area where I disagree. Is I don't really have any major production issues with this. That's not really.
All I'm saying is go back and listen to Control right before this. I feel like people will see a little bit more of what I'm talking about, because there is a stark fucking difference.
I definitely agree that the low end is over present. I agree with that. I think that's definitely an accurate assessment of how this sounds. I guess it's just not something that gets in the way of the album enough for me.
Great album cover. Really like the album cover. It's really nice.
Yeah, it's a good album cover.
You don't fall off that thing.
Yeah.
Be careful.
Get off of there.
Be careful, SZA.
Yeah, all right. Let's do our favorite tracks and ratings for SZA's S.O.S. All right, Jake, let me lead us off.
Well, like SZA's
sauce. Jesus Christ. My three favorite tracks on here, I'm gonna say Snooze, Gone Girl, and Good Days. The only instance that has ever happened where Phoebe Bridgers has appeared on an album and not made it my three favorite tracks, even though it's still a good song. Least favorite track on here is either F2F or I Hate You. And I give it a 5 out of 10.
All right, Morgan.
My favorites probably Gone Girl, Kill Bill, and Open Arms.
Just the ones that are named after good films.
Yeah.
I wish that was a theme that she'd like. I don't know. She didn't have to, but like
cool.
that would have been a cool thread if she'd like stuck to it beyond 2 songs.
Yeah, two movies and a Journey song. Yeah, least favorites F2F. Sounds like fried Duke. 4.5 out of 10.
My 3 favorite tracks are Gone Girl, Good Days, and look, it's probably not actually one of my 3 favorite tracks, but just because just to illustrate that I do like it considerably more than you two, I'm going to put F2F in there. And more as a way of saying like I would like more like this, and more like committed to what this is wanting to be, as opposed to admittedly the afterthought that it kind of does feel a bit like. And my least favorite track is Forgiveless, I guess, purely for wasting ODB and Björk. Like, come on. Yeah, and the album gets a 5 from me, which means that overall we get an average rating of 4.8 for SZA's S.O.S. All right, moving into our second review of the episode, let's talk about Little Simz. She's back already,
Ayo.
you know, hot off the trails of the success of Mercury Prize winner. Sometimes I Might Be Introvert as well. And that was an album that was very momentous for Little Simz, right? It was the album that kind of cemented her ascendance after the underrated, like Grey Area was this kind of album where everyone who heard that album loved it, but just not enough people really heard
But
it.
not everyone heard it.
But that was a really, really fantastic record. And I think obviously everyone who heard that knew that Little Simz was going to go on to do great things. And then it was in collaboration with Inflow from the now renowned and well-known collaborative act Salt. She made Sometimes I Might Be an Introvert, which was such a massive record, right? Such a huge, bombastic, balls to the wall opus, essentially, of self-love, of love for women and the people in her life and the people around her and the music that she's grown up loving and all these sorts of things. It was a massive tribute to herself, her identity, and all the things that make it up, essentially. Her family, her life, all of that. And it was a massively successful record for Little Simz, commercially, critically. Probably actually didn't do amazingly commercially, at least in terms of how well it could have done, but still, everyone who heard that record loved it, and more people heard it than Grey Area. So it was definitely a success. And in the interim, after that, I believe that she signed a record deal. I can't remember who it was with. This is the kind of detail I should have gotten nailed down. It might have been Island Records. Anyway, she signed a new contract. She essentially was slowly getting more and more ingested by the machine of music, essentially, which is particularly brutal and notorious in the UK, and essentially being molded in particular ways that she found herself, you know, unwilling to allow to happen to her, but also kind of she was used, and I think had her image taken advantage of, and her platform and all these sorts of aspects of her musical identity were being molded in ways that she didn't care for by people that she had never asked to do that. And so that aspect of behind the scenes drama, as well as aspects of her own personal life and, you know, things that she's gone through and amongst the massive shift in her life following the success of that album, have fed into No Thank You, the new record, which is kind of a textbook example of like the low-key follow-up to the massively polished and, you know, refined vision of the big Ascendant album, essentially. The album that kind of dramatically reduces the stakes for the artist after the album before it had kind of massively increased them and set this high example for, you know, this high sort of level that we expect from Little Simz. This is one of those albums that kind of deliberately tries to remove that level of expectation and just give you something that is much different to what you would expect. An album that is deliberately
the TPAB to Damn.
Yeah, or even like that's a kind of a good way of thinking of it as well. Or even I was even going to say like the Untitled Unmastered to the TPAB, but that's kind of a different thing because that's so wrapped up in what TPAB is. But yeah, a good example, right? It's a big high profile example, right? Trying to reduce the stakes, trying to reduce the scale, but purposefully, because the subject matter and everything that Simz wants to talk about is so much more on a smaller scale for her on this one. It's more intimate. It's more to do with her personal life in ways that her previous record definitely touched on, but that was a record that was so much about her in a broader sense. And this is a record about her life in the period since then, specifically the things that she has gone through, you know, the things she needs to vent about, basically. And so she's re-teamed up with Inflow, who is doing a very similar sort of thing, if admittedly a little bit more low-key and a little bit less bombastic in terms of what you would expect from him, these kind of warm, sultry, soulful synthesizer sounds and these massive swelling string sounds that he's become very characteristic for, are both present all over this. But it's almost like, especially down to the album cover as well, which is like this lo-fi grainy picture of her that looks like it kind of just looks like this offhanded, like, I think it's deliberately staged to look like this kind of paparazzi photo that's kind of been captured of her at this moment where she's sort of not prepared to be seen, essentially. And she, her hair's in her face, and she's off center, and she's surrounded by these kind of what I guess might be speakers, but you kind of can't really tell what they are. It's this very alarming and kind of off-kilter image that sets up an expectation for her headspace on this record, essentially, which is that you need to get the fuck away from her and basically let her be. That is entwined with other things that she wants to talk about as well that are more familiar from her previous work as well, womanhood, cultural subject matter, things that she's interested in. But yeah, for the most part, this is Little Simz reducing the stakes dramatically so that she can fucking vent for 40 minutes over Inflow's production. And it's an intense record, surprisingly intense, I think, for what it is. It has these aspects to the way that it's produced and put together that do feel deliberately, how do I word this? Like, I guess less finished. Like some songs will kind of just like meander a little bit at the end once she's finished rapping, and we'll kind of cycle through these different vocal samples or gospel choirs or soul things for like a minute and a half, and the song will just end. Or there'll be other elements, like some songs will just kind of start very suddenly or end very suddenly, and then there's this whole feeling to the way that it flows that's kind of a little bit disjointed as well. Structurally, it's a little bit all over the place. It has its climax emotionally and performance wise weirdly kind of in the middle of the album as opposed to towards the end. And so the whole thing just kind of has this sense of like off-kilterness to it. The songs in general are on the longer side as well, so you do get to kind of one of my favorite aspects of the album actually is you get to sort of really spend time lingering in the spaces that Inflow creates, and they're often very beautiful and very moving, and just also very kind of easy to sort of vibe to and relax to on songs like Angel, for instance, and on songs like X as well. That's kind of broadly what it is. Jake and Morgan, you can go into a little bit more detail if you like about what your experiences were with this album and what you think Simz is trying to do here, and what your thoughts are on the execution and on the songs themselves.
I will say at the outset, it's a little difficult not to be sort of underwhelmed by this, especially when it starts so strongly. I think Angel is like just top tier stuff.
Fucking excellent song.
Yeah.
Yeah, agree wholeheartedly.
It starts you on a similar level that Introvert starts you at. And then there's a deliberate subversion here that I'm not sure, at least from my perspective, that really is beneficial to the overall product or Simz's current career trajectory. And far be it for me to act like the arbiter of the career path for a up and coming successful rapper, but it doesn't necessarily seem beneficial to sort of go in the more low key direction that this record goes into. But there's even like a subversion of that here, and that's where I get into my more positive thoughts of how intense and cathartic so much of this record feels. It's less of a grand sweeping opus like Introvert was, and more of just a shot in the arm of Simz's current creative expression and overall mindset after the success of Introvert. It's direct and indirect all at the same time, and it's a sort of difficult record to think about and sort of untie, but it is really fascinating to listen to and really worthwhile.
When I was
overall, I really did enjoy it.
when I was first listening to this, I was like, during my first experience of this, and I know we'll talk about the things that let this album down structurally, and we'll get into that, but actually for the most part, like for the first 7 songs of this record, I think not only are they all great songs, but they are structured really well, I think, even though they do still have some of those sort of weird run times and weird sort of start-stop elements to the way that they are structured. So at some points, thematically, I think the album is, for the most part, really well structured, like at least for those first 7 songs, because you start in this really intimate place. It's down to the way that Angel sounds. It's kind of really low-key, subdued beat. It has real intimacy that you're given when Simz comes in, and she's really sort of, it feels like she's speaking to you so much. There's actually aspects of this record, particularly with regard to the vocals, where it almost feels like they're not even mastered properly, to deliberately give a sense that this is really off the cuff and that Simz is kind of just sort of speaking into the mic, and that's just kind of being laid down. There's like, one of the things I remember about Simbi, the album before this, is that, the elements of Inflow's production, like the strings, are so massive that they can sometimes even dwarf her as a performer. And as great as she is on that album, the instrumentals are like so maximalist that they kind of steal the show a lot, and she has to really fight to make sure they don't. And she does, and she succeeds beautifully. Whereas here, it's kind of like, she's so centered mix-wise, and her voice is so kind of, I don't want to say loud, but like I said, kind of a little bit less conventionally mastered, or less kind of conventionally kind of placed. So she's just there. She's in the center channel the entire time. And yeah, like it starts off, she sort of starts introducing you to some of, like, setting the context for the things that she's upset about with Angel. And you get some real bombastic songs like Gorilla, for instance. And I think Silhouette is a fantastic track that is really a nice fusion of Inflow's most kind of maximalist tendencies with really fantastic flows and pace from Simz, even if I think that song does go on a little bit too long. And then so you get this kind of anger that the record kind of builds towards in that first stretch that kind of really kind of feels like it's cemented with Silhouette and No Mercy. And then you get this midsection where it's like that anger curdles into this kind of introspective reflection on, the feminine experience as well within the machine, and how some people are just not as able to deal with the pressures of their lives, whether it's in the context of fame or whatever, or just in the context of being a woman or a black woman or a black person. And and the album kind of slowly transitions into a meditation on that, whereas the first few songs are kind of more about her career specifically. So I like the way that the album kind of shifts gears subtly as you move into that midsection, and it all just kind of climaxes with what I think are the 2 best songs on the record, Heart on Fire and Broken in particular, which is maybe my favorite song she's ever put out, actually. It's definitely up there. It's an incredible track where each verse that she drops on the song is more intense and more kind of just visceral in its performance and in the things that she gets at than the one before it. And it's just this amazing peak the album reaches that is made so much stronger by the way that it's built to that point. Jake, what are your thoughts?
This is an album that derives its identity and what makes it special kind of from its blemishes. And why I think that kind of works as to where maybe the SZA album kind of tried to go for something similar, what this is built upon is a way more solid foundation. Little Simz is always at peak performance. Like these last 3 records from her, she is never not giving you 10 out of 10 in terms of pen game, in terms of performance and delivery. And on here, she's really focused. She's really cold. She's like almost confident to a fault on here, where she seems like there are moments where it feels like maybe some vulnerability might add to the experience a little bit, but the confidence she's projecting is so infectious that it manages to grow on you a little bit. And just like solidly, fundamentally, her flows are outstanding. Her lyricism is great. And that is a consistent thing throughout the whole album. And whenever she actually tries her hand at like actually proper singing, that's also fantastic. In fact, I kind of wish she did more of that, because if anything, I kind of think that the solid flows and the consistent vibe of those first 7 songs that we were talking about kind of builds it to have a slightly repetitious structure. I do share Riley's complaint that a lot of these songs have like a really solid first 75%, and then the final 25% is just kind of the instrumental going off and then doing its own thing, which is fine. It always sounds great. It's always nice to listen to. I'm never not enjoying it, but it feels like it does have a bit of a repetitious, like, structural thing that I feel like might be trimmed back. And like, genuinely, I do think that she manages to fit a singularity into this that manages to separate it from Sometimes I Might Be Introvert, because that is an album where there's so much artistic clarity that you're just always with her. You're always in the moment. Whereas this is an album that takes a little bit more pondering, a little bit more thinking. This is an album where she's like, it's funny that, you know, she signs a record deal and then makes an album that is like so focused on just being jaded with the entire record industry and just the way the industry treats rappers, women, people like her. And, you know, like, power to her for actually speaking on these issues and speaking on them in a way that feels really nuanced and really coherent. And there are also just more personal moments where she's rapping from the perspective of like people who, you know, she knows, or people in her family, and like the pressures of Black masculinity. It's like, it's really affecting stuff. It's really powerful. And there are moments on stuff like the song Silhouette, which again, I think this is a lyrical highlight of the album for me. The way she recontextualizes the concept of the silhouette at different points in the song is genius, and just like one of the most affecting moments just like in music of albums last year is just at the very end, where she says, "Better do the work if you ain't looked in the mirror yet. I don't want to live my life being a silhouette." Like, that line now is just like, shit, man, that's powerful. That's like motivating. Like, I hear like a lot of the like the big opulent strings on this record. It makes me want to like, it makes me feel like I'm listening to like the Rocky montage music. Like, I want to go and like do something with my life when I hear this shit. A lot of it's like really affirming and really like positive, and like it's always about showing the fractures in the facade while still never being beaten down by it. Like, Little Simz is a force to be reckoned with. She's going to go forward. She's going to acknowledge everything that's holding her back, but she's never going to stop moving. And that's what gives this project, I think, so much like it just has a lot of mileage with what it is. And again, those first 7 songs are fantastic. And it's why I am kind of mixed on the album and how it ends with the Sideways, Who Even Cares, and Control.
Songs.
So Sideways is easily my least favorite thing on the album, and it's not just because it's a 2-minute scant song, but because I even kind of like what Simz is doing on here. It's just that the beat on here is just like the same 5-second long loop that stops at one point and then just gets repeated over and over and over and over and over again. And then immediately after that, you have a song that is Who Even Cares, which is basically like the same thing, but like a more, you know, properly sung song, but it's got a very hazy kind of psychedelic sort of like washed out backing beat to it, and it sounds nice, but there's nothing about it that really leaves a lasting impression whatsoever, and it fails to make an impact. And to me anyway, it feels like if you delete these 2 songs, you still have a proper album's worth of material that's like, you know, 40 minutes plus on here. Like, I think that Control is a better song than both of those, but I still wouldn't necessarily call it like, it's not intrinsic to the arc of the record and the way that the rest of the album is. And I just feel like if you took these 3 songs off of it and just made this like one of those longer hip hop EPs that people are keen on releasing, or even just a mixtape, generally speaking,
just make it a 7-song 40-minute album. It will be fine. Like,
it would be fine, and it would feel more complete. It's still probably not going to be the best version of itself, because I do think some of the better moments on here still do need some trimming. But again, the fact that Lil Simz is on here propels even the weakest moments that aren't on those last 3 tracks to still being fucking great. I mean, this is still like one of the better hip hop albums released last year, frankly. And it has a litany of issues. It needs a little bit more sculpting to be the best possible version of itself, I think.
It feels as almost as though, and again, we project, and I have to admit this is projection. It feels almost as though like there's an element, maybe even a tiny element of like self-sabotage in the way that this album ends, and kind of like trying to deliberately sort of really underline that this is something very sort of off the cuff and not intended to kind of be, well, I don't want to say not intended to be taken seriously, because it's definitely intended to be taken seriously, but not intended to be kind of viewed as Simz' next attempt at an opus necessary. Like, to me, songs like Sideways, Who Even Cares, and Control are like excuses for her to experiment and make songs in a slightly different format, or with a slightly different sound, or doing something slightly different that so they're just in a chance, like with Who Even Cares, like playing around with the different vocal style she does in that song, which God loves Simz. She sounds fucking terrible on this song. I'm sorry. Her singing, she sounds half asleep. I don't like it at all. I appreciate the attempt to branch out.
And she sounds so much better on other songs on here, which make it kind of perplexing, honestly.
And the thing that really, that makes them most egregious is that aesthetically and sonically, these last three songs just don't fit at all with the seven before them. There's this arc that I was talking about, this sound, this particular thing that represents a kind of continuation of that collaboration with Inflow and this aesthetic they've built together. And those last three songs just kind of steamroll it. It's this completely like the sample on Sideways is mixed so loud it physically hurts to listen to. I'm not sure what the decision is there. You can make something sound deliberately rough without making it actively painful, especially coming after Broken. It feels like the mood that song sustains, which is amazing, is like deliberately, again, this is why I feel like there must be some element of like deliberate, I don't know if self-sabotage is the right word, but just this deliberate desire to kind of cut through whatever she's established. It feels so, it completely ruins the moment, frankly, at the end of that song. And Control's fine, but it just doesn't fit much either. So I'm just at a loss with the last three songs as to why they're there. They definitely hamper so much of what the album builds and achieves, with its massively fantastic climactic moments on Heart on Fire and X as well, which has this whole thread of like generational, more broadly macro political social stuff that she talks about that feels like a logical extension of the more personal stuff earlier on. Like I said, it's so beautifully structured thematically, even if the songs themselves need a little bit of trimming still, but thematically there's such a great arc to those first 7 songs, and then it's just this little bizarro exercise at the end that I don't fully comprehend.
I gotta say, coming after, like, it's so, again, it is infinitely frustrating just because I do think the album would end phenomenally on Broken, which is my favorite song on here. One of my favorite Little Simz songs that she's put out, frankly. I think this is on par with everything that was on Simbi. This is just such a fantastic look at the interiority of Simz and the people in her life. And just like, again, the wordplay, the flows on here. This is an immaculately performed, structured, and written song, but it's all in the performance here. The repeated refrain, the feeling broken and you don't exist when you're feeling broken and you can't fix it, over and over and over again. It's just, this is a properly heartbreaking song. And I feel like this is the kind of note you would want an album like this to go out on, in a state of disrepair, in a state of like unresolved. And it further deepens my questioning to those final 3 tracks, especially considering they're like all shorter than most of the proper songs on here. That's just a decision that really baffles me, honestly.
Yeah. Anyway, like we definitely made that point clearly enough. It is a great record still, I think. I even will
100% worth a listen, an essential listen, in fact.
Yeah, I think that, again, those first 7 songs and the way that they're pieced together is so strong that the last 3 songs don't even really detract that much from the experience for me. They're an unfortunate blemish that we have acknowledged because we have to, but still, at the very least, all of the weaknesses of this record are kind of like cordoned off in a way where you can kind of just turn the album off early if you want. And
take them away and this album is longer than Gray Area.
Yeah. So it's a good album. It's a great album, in fact, and I think it builds and elaborates on some of the core ideas of her previous record, as well as tying the personal to the more political and socio-cultural and structural in very effective ways, I think. I hope that Simz continues to follow her artistic impulse regardless, because she has great instincts for the most part. And I'm glad she got to do something like this. I mean, I think down to releasing it at the end of the year was just another way to emphasize for her how kind of on the fly and just sort of an immediate,
Low
straightforward,
stakes.
blunt statement with no, that is intended to be just taken on its own terms and not surrounded by the groundswell of hype or the machine or whatever. It is just supposed to be this more intimate thing. And so on that level, I think it's a success. All right. Let's do our favorite tracks and ratings then for No Merci by Little Simz. Nice pun in that song, by the way. Very good. A+. Jake, why don't you go first?
My three favorite tracks on here got to be Broken, Angel, and yeah, I'll say the most underrated song on here is No Mercy. I really love that song. Least favorite is most certainly Sideways. And yeah, I'll give it a 7.5. This is a frustrating release, but nonetheless one that is imperative that you listen to. This is an album with issues that would sink any lesser album or lesser artist, and it's just Simz defiantly proving that those problems don't matter when you're as good as she is.
Morgan.
Yeah, three favorites: Angel, Heart on Fire, and Silhouette. Least favorites is Sideways, naturally. And I will also go with a 7.5.
All right, my three favorites are Angel, Heart on Fire, and Broken. My least favorite is probably actually Who Even Cares, just to be a little bit different. I'm going to give the album a 7 out of 10, which gives us an average overall of 7.3 for Little Simz. No, thank you. Let us know at home what you think of either of the albums we've discussed today, SZA's S.O.S. or Little Simz, No Thank You. You can go and check out as well the video we put out earlier this week as well, where we sort of more informally discussed what we've been listening to and what we're looking forward to in music this year as well. That's already been up on the channel as well, so go check that out if you haven't already. We'll be back soon. Not 100% sure on what the next video will be, but we will be back again very soon. And if not before then we'll be back to discuss new releases again same time next week. So stick around for that. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribing if you have not already. Those things both help us out a lot. You can also hit the join button for just $1 a month to support the channel if you want to, if you want your name featured in the title call of every video on this channel, or if you want to recommend us something to listen to and have that recommendation at the top of the pile.
And if you're one of our 200 new subscribers in the last month, hey, so
what it
welcome.
do?
Yeah, welcome. Say hey below if you are new to the channel. We want to hear from you. As always, though, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Old Spice. If your grandfather hadn't worn it, you wouldn't exist.